Hello, welcome back to my channel. So if you haven't been here before, I'm Jamie. I read a lot of books. This is my weekly wrap-up for the first week of November. And this is the one print book that I read this week. Yeah. So usually I read a lot of books that are in print and I can show them, even if it's not all of them. I have a lot more print books usually. But this month is Netgalley November, and I'm reading a lot of Netgalley, which is good because I have a lot of Netgalleys. Yeah, so I've finished 6 books so far in November, which is a little low because we're on the 8th now, but I got bogged down because I started out with heavy topics right from the start. So I started out with I Am Malala as my print book and Gaza Medic by Richard Villar as my first 2 books for the month. So it took me several days to finish I Am Malala because Gaza Medic was heavy, very heavy reading. And yeah, I kept getting distracted from reading more heavy books. So I did eventually finish this one. And along the way, I also finished The Balkan Air by Aydin Kavara and The Spamalot Diaries by Eric Idle. Too Many Bridges by Bill Gormley. And then the last one I finished so far is Night and Day by John Connolly. So, of these, far too many in a row were heavy books. The Balkan Air was also a heavy book. And I sort of rebelled and decided I was not reading any more heavy books for a little while. So I picked up the Spamalot Diaries, which is written by a comedian. It's not really a book of comedy. It's nonfiction book about putting together the Spamalot musical. So there are funny bits. And it is the sort of book that might inspire you to watch Spamalot the musical, or listen to the soundtrack, or both. Maybe more than once if you're also avoiding doing serious reading. That might have happened. Yeah, so I spent a lot more time doing follow-up to Spamalot Diaries rather than reading more books. So that's where I only finished 6 books in 8 days. Very sad. But I did enjoy Spamalot, so that's good. And I've had the song stuck in my head ever since. So the cats are getting used to the whistling part of always look on the bright side of life, because I've been doing that. Yeah. Anyway. So that's kind of been my week so far. Gaza Medic is really good. If you've been following the violence in Gaza and in the Palestinian parts of Israel in general at this point, it's a topic that you might want to approach carefully, depending on where you're at mentally with all this, because like I had to actually tune out completely, like not allowed to look at the news, doing other things, because I was just getting way too emotionally impacted as a person who can't really do anything to make it stop, and it's not like I have the ear of anybody who can. At some point you just focus on other things. and move on and tune in occasionally to see if it's over yet, which it's not. But this is, kind of me tuning back in, because a year ago I was immersed in watching the horrible stuff unfolding. So if you have been living under a rock for the past year, last year in October, I think it was October, last fall, Hamas, or a group of people under Hamas, or involved with Hamas, or something, group of terrorists, attacked a bunch of peaceful Israeli civilians. Not all of them civilians, but most of the casualties were civilian. Killed over 1,000 people in one fell swoop, like a whole bunch of different things going on all at once, kind of thing. It was horrible, and the whole world was horrified and stood with Israel in this time of terrible sorrow, and within the week, really within less than 48 hours, opinion was already starting to shift, because Israel apparently already had a plan for what to do in the event that they could start to wipe out Palestinians. They don't necessarily say that, but it's alarming how much of what they were saying was exactly that. And they're doing as promised. They're trying really hard to wipe out the Palestinians. They're not, pussyfooting around it. They really are wanting to eradicate the Palestinians from their state. Not everybody. There are a lot of Israelis that are pissed off at what's going on and don't want it to represent them at all, and would really rather the violence stop. Even ignoring the part about what's going to happen afterwards, because there's still more Palestinians now outside Israel than in, and they're pissed off. Anyway, it's a mess. It's been a mess. Anyone, younger than, born in the 40s, basically, was around to see how Israel started, and that this has not really been a safe place to live ever since, because, and actually before, it's a mess. Boy, am I glad I don't live over there. Anyway, it's yet another chapter in an ongoing saga of violence that has gone way over the top at this point. And the current news on the same conflict is famine, horrible lack of medical supplies, lack of medical care. There's still bombing civilians, killing civilians. The violence has spread beyond Gaza, and Israel's doing their darned best to create a regional war out of their attempted genocide of the Palestinian people within the Israeli state. So we'll see. By this time next year, we may be seeing a full-scale regional war, or now that Trump is the president-elect for the U.S. for next year, who knows, because he likes Putin, and he likes Russia, and right now there's still a war going on where Russia is trying to do a land grab on Ukraine, and we've been watching that for a while now, too. One of those other horrible conflicts that is not nearly as horrible because they can at least fight back. Not as well as they could if they had more weapons, but that's old stories now. But all of this may come together because Ukraine isn't that far from Israel. And yeah, so it's anyone's guess what we'll be talking about by next year. Nonfiction November lends itself to revisiting these things because, yeah, this is when we read a lot of these books that happen to tie into current events. Even though we've been reading murder mysteries and fantasy novels and science fiction most of the year, and basically sticking our fingers in our ears like, okay, let's try and focus on things that are not the horrible stuff people are doing to each other in other parts of the world. Anyway, I don't think we really digress, but we kind of digress. Let's get back to the books. So, Gaza Medic. The author, Richard Villars, is a surgeon who has gone to war zones to work as a surgeon in the past and did so a few months ago in Gaza with a volunteer group where they go and go into the war zone instead of away from it to help people who are hurt. And by hurt, we mean really badly hurt. And this book could be far more gruesome than it was. There are pictures. They could be much worse. There are stories about, some of the injured that the author was treating or involved with treating. But it's all very tastefully done. It's not trauma porn. So I appreciated that. I have read similar sorts of books where they went over the top to where it was almost unreadable. This is not one of those. I highly recommend it. Not just because it's current events and, it's nice to tune in every once in a while, but also he gets into like the psychological side of preparing to enter a war zone as a medic, knowing that medical personnel and medical facilities are actually being targeted by the people doing the blowing things up part. Because that is, that's like superhero territory of, Superman thinking about going into the firefight instead of away from it. Where Superman's gonna draw fire. Maybe not quite to that extent. I still doubt that all the Israeli soldiers are pointedly aiming at medical personnel. But it's interesting how much Israel is targeting ambulances and hospitals and aid workers, and it's not accidental anymore. It's really obvious. It's not accidental. And this book does lend weight to not buying that it's accidental. Obviously, it's one man's story, one man's experience, so it's not like you can read exactly what's going on in the war from this one guy. Especially in a war zone, it's chaotic. He could only see the part that he could see. And after Israel stops trying to eradicate the Palestinians, at least for a little while, so that we can start actually trying to find facts and put things together into a narrative, then we'll find out what's really been going on and who's really responsible. And it may be quite a few years at this point. But I do hope I live long enough to read the books that come out of good journalist type writing on what actually happened. So, narrative, real facts, backed up multiple levels, and anyway, so in the meantime, we have books like this. Highly recommend it. Gaza Medic came out at the end of October, so it is out. That was the first book I read in November. So starting with a high point. Yay. So then the next book I finished was The Balkan Heir, which is about all the violence in Yugoslavia as it was collapsing into all of the teeny tiny states that it turned into. But it doesn't start out as a war story. It starts out as a soul being conned into being born in a body that's going to grow up into being a boy in this world, in this conflict. And there's this weird character, Ronnie, who is the con artist, or the con man. It's like the trickster that's getting this soul to go through all this. Some of that I didn't quite understand, and I felt like there's probably a myth or legend or supporting set of concepts that I'm missing for that. And knowing friends that are from that region and some of the kind of fairy tale elements that they're used to, I'm betting that some of that's just a regional cultural thing that I'm missing. So it was fun. I didn't have to understand it really. The kid growing up is nice. It was an interesting perspective as the kid's growing up, because we start out with the soul going into the body, and he goes into the wrong body. So he's supposed to be Alexander. He ends up being Ahmed, which he's a little concerned about. That's a little confusing, but okay, fine. The mom is nice. Early childhood is nice. And it's from his perspective all the way through until we get to where he's interacting with people and normal narrative sort of structure. Which reminded me a bit of Elif Shafak's book that I read last month. The arc about the water droplet, that we're in the perspective of the water droplet and going through all these different places. But it does go from the unborn and then born and then baby perspective to a normal sort of storytelling pretty quickly. So if that sort of experimental storytelling is not for you, it doesn't last very long. And yeah, I think that was the weakest part of the book, actually, because it was an interesting idea. I'm not sure if it was executed as finely as it needed to be. But it was okay. It was fine. And then we get to the kind of how the violence comes about. Like, where does the violence come from? Why is this something that's even on the table? And I had a long discussion on this sort of concept with one of my siblings. And this book actually came into play in this discussion. Kind of where the elements of violence come from. And then, you know, kind of a corollary to that when you're reading it is, why don't we have that? Like, because where I live, in the society that I live in, that kind of violence is not something that's readily on the table. It would take a lot to cross that line to where being cruel and violent and physically hurting other people would seem normal. But the author does introduce an argument in novel form, so it's not like a philosophical digression. It's actually in the storytelling, for where the violence comes from, and I appreciated that. It does involve cruelty scenes where animals are the victims, so if that bugs you, there's one with a pig and one with a dog. They're bad. They're like, you know, skip through the pages until you get to the end kind of scenes, if that bugs you. And I do know some readers that are just going to not be able to finish the book because of those scenes. Yeah, they are perhaps necessary to the story because they do give an idea of how that kind of cruelty and violence can simmer under the surface in a society until it can find form in a war. And of course, reading this after Gaza Medic and thinking about all the ongoing violence in Israel, I have to wonder how much of that kind of violence embedded in the mentality of people being raised as Israelis contributes to what we're seeing. And probably the same for everybody in that region. It's not like this is the only place where baffling levels of violence and cruelty pop up. And obviously it pops up elsewhere because we're in the Balkans in this book, which is Europe, not the Arabian Peninsula area. Anyway, so that was how I started my month. And I was expecting to finish one arc and one print book at a time, and it took me forever to get back to this one because this is also a heavy topic. I read the first 2 chapters alongside reading the arc, and then very quickly it was just too much all at once and had to move on to something happy. I Am Malala is about Malala and her childhood and the setting that she grew up in, and kind of the backstory of what was happening in Pakistan that led to her being shot on a bus for being an advocate for girls' education. And then, surprisingly, a lot of the people in the chats for the current Netgalley November 24/7, all 30 days of November reading sprints. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Nicole, for organizing that. It's amazing. But yeah, so amazingly enough, not everybody on those sprints had heard of Malala. So I obviously am not living in quite the same headspace as a lot of other readers that read a ton of books. Yeah, I thought everybody knew who she was by now. Anyway, Malala is, at this point, an advocate for women's rights and girls' rights, especially to education, and the importance of girls' education. She spoke at the UN on these topics, and I haven't looked at what she's doing now yet, but I'm betting that she is still involved in that activist work. Yeah, so she's a really interesting person, and especially for the fact that she could stand up to the Taliban and the groups before the Taliban that were eradicating girls' rights and women's rights in Pakistan. I actually had a friend when I was in grad school who was an atheist and could not go home and had to be very careful that their presence as an atheist in the living world was not too obvious, so that their family would not be targeted as family of an atheist. So a lot of the backstory in this one was heavy reading for me because I knew my friend's reasons for being cautious right from the start, and that's, they're still cautious, and I still respect that, because I can't imagine, well, I can kind of imagine, but I don't like to. The idea that if you go home and people know that you're in the country, they can arrest you and kill you outright because you're an atheist. Like, really? Oh my gosh. So that's the kind of world that Malala's, explaining how it got to that point, and all the steps that went from a Pakistan that looked like it was becoming modern and egalitarian, and all of a sudden it starts going towards what it is now. It's very sad, very annoying. And it's not the only country that's done that. I read another book, I don't even remember which book it was anymore, but a couple years ago on Iran. It was a similar story, just without the girls' rights and education element. But yeah, so it's another topic area that was of interest this week. Also because of women's rights in general as a topic. Because in the US election, that's one of the things that's hugely been talked about leading up to the election. We live in a very modern society in which we like to think that we are completely egalitarian and women's and men's rights are all protected and great, and LGBTQ rights are all protected, which they're not. I live in a state where they are, and I can be happy to know that we actually did decide in a direction where I can still be happy to live here. But in the country at large, for the next 4 years, we were going to be very much watching what's going on in our own country and reading books like this about countries that were modern and digressed into, or devolved is a better word, devolved into something that's primitive and cruel and not somewhere we want to live. How this happens, because it could happen here. Quoting the Sinclair Lewis title, it could happen here. Heavy topics. I was going to make a ranting video after I finished this book and watched the election, which was the same night. Bad combination. Really bad combination. Anyway, so I was going to do this ranting video about how women in the U.S. really need to step up, being more advocating their own rights and abilities, and I don't know where it was going to go from there, because it really, I obviously didn't make it, because after I started trying to sketch out what I was going to say, I was like, I'm just grumbling. I don't really have a thesis yet. I might make one. I still might do some more videos talking about women and minorities and oppressed groups, and personal responsibility, I think, was part of the theme of what I was grumbling. So if I read more books that are tangential on those topics, it will come up again. As a female, and an atheist, and somebody that has a disability, I have ties into a lot of those topics, and they will probably come up. If that kind of advocacy and discussion bugs you, fair warning. I am a living embodiment of the intersection of a lot of different things, and they will come up. Especially given the results of the election in the U.S. this year. So, anyway, happy books. We've gotten almost to half an hour, and I haven't talked about the happy books yet. Happy books. So the Spamalot Diaries was my I need something that's not heavy book. Not comedy, as I said, but still written by a comedian and touches on comedy enough that it's light and happy, and it's the story of something that didn't seem like it was going to work for so long, and there were all sorts of hurdles, and they overcame them and resulted in a Tony Award-winning, amazing musical that has actually had a return to the stage in the last year, and hopefully will be around in some form or another for a long time. I saw, I think, 1 or 2 amateur and school productions of it via YouTube as well, so obviously it's been played by other people at this point, and future versions of Glee will probably include Spamalot songs, because some of them are kind of fun. I don't know if they have, actually. I stopped watching Glee right around the bit where the school psychologist and the choir director get married. So I know that it didn't just stop after that. So I've missed a lot of Glee. I don't know if they've done Spamalot songs. But they might have. I might have to start watching Glee again and see what I missed. Anyway, so that was fun. And then I, obviously watched a lot of Spamalot stuff. I also have been getting into music by Aurora. I probably have heard her songs before, but not like enough that I would recognize them, just enough that it was kind of familiar. But I came across her when I was looking for German language pop songs at the end of last month. And she's not German, she's Norwegian. She sings in English, at least all the stuff that I've been watching. But they came up in the same recommended videos when I was watching German pop songs. So, yeah, I've been enjoying those. And yeah, that gets me to the last couple days. I finished a murder mystery called Too Many Bridges by Bill Gormley, which was okay. It was a 4-star book for me. It was kind of an interesting structure because we don't start out with a body. So we start out with an anonymous tip that there's been a murder. But there's no missing persons, there's no body. But the detective doesn't feel right dismissing it because there's something about it that makes him think that there's been a murder. They just haven't found it yet. And it goes from there to actually getting into the meat of the crime. And the blurbs that I saw when I picked out this arc did mention that it was in the same vein as Ed McBain. I've read maybe 2 or 3 Ed McBain books. At least 1, probably 3. So I did have some reference for whether that is true, and it did match. The same kind of police procedural, murder mystery, detective sort of book. In the crime bit, like where we're actually in the solving the crime bit, interviewing witnesses and, detective work, it really read like what you'd expect for a modern author inspired by Ed McBain. This, I think, is Gormley's first murder mystery. So, if this was a later work by some author, it would have been a 3-star book for me. Because the rest of the novel was more annoying than not. It was still good. I finished it. So 3 stars, definitely not lower than that. 4 stars because the middle was really good. But one thing that Gormley needs to work on for the next one, hopefully there will be one. It was good enough to have a second book in the series. That's good. But the dialogue goes on way too long. Like, in real life, you would follow the conversation to the end of the conversation. In a novel, I don't need to see the whole conversation. There's a little bit where what they say to each other exactly is important to the novel. Beyond that, there are all sorts of techniques for easing out of the conversation before it gets tedious. We need that. There are quite a few pages where I would have cut off the conversation and been just fine. Leaves a long string of dialogue that is just clogging up the book. And at the same time, the first part of the book, there's no body. There's no investigation to be done yet, really. And it's like there's just tangents. There's one point where one of the characters that's gonna be important, she goes to the zoo, and we spend an entire chapter with her at the zoo. There's nothing really in that chapter that has anything to do with the story. And it's not really even character development, because we're looking at the zoo, we're not looking at her. So, yeah, the first part needs editing. And I would love to see more if we're going to have more character development sort of stuff leading into the murder. It needs to be tightened up and about setting the scene and setting the characters and giving backstory in a way where it all links together to make one cohesive crime novel, as opposed to a whole bunch of tangents that may or may not have anything to do with the rest of the book. So that was my take on it. But as a first detective novel by a guy, it was good. Mine will probably be just about as problematic. So for what it is, it was well done and definitely worth doing book 2, and further developing the characters that carry over, and working on what I described in some of the chats I was in as small talk. Like, the small talk part is missing or badly done. So that's the part that needs to be tightened up and improved on. And one of the last authors I was reading last month, Kathy Reichs, kept coming to mind for an author that does a really good job of it. Because in that author's work, we meet Bones, basically. Bones is the TV show that came off of Reich's books. But in the books, her character is well developed. There's a lot of, romantic subplot and subplots to deal with her relationship with her daughter and her relationships with the people she works with, and, how she deals with coworkers that can't stand her and that she can't stand, and all that's in there. But it doesn't feel like we've wandered off and forgotten we're in the middle of a crime novel when Reichs gets into those parts of her books. So I don't know from a craft perspective offhand what makes those successful and this one not. And that's something that maybe next year I'm going to get more into, is as a reviewer, sort of solidifying in my own mind what the craft is for what makes some novels so much more successful than others on the same stuff. So that may be something that I will be keeping in mind for next year, and what I choose to read and which readathon teams I choose to be on, so that I can sort of focus my attention on being able to understand more why something didn't work and why other things did. Anyway, so useful book for me to read, because it did get me started thinking about, why is this not clicking? Why is this off? And I think reading all murder mysteries last month helped too, because I had so many different stories in my head by that point. Same genre, different authors, for how other people do this stuff. So it's not just I vaguely don't feel like it worked. Like, well, no, I read 30 plus books where it did work in different directions. Some of them last month didn't work either. So, anyway, but I would definitely pick up the next book. So whenever Gormley gets around to having his next book published and it shows up in NetGalley, I will probably request it, because, yeah, it was okay. And then the last book I finished this month, before I get to the 40-minute mark, oh my gosh, is Night and Day by John Connolly. This is a short story collection by an author who I'm pretty sure I've read before. Which book I read? I don't remember offhand. It was a novel. I know I read a novel by him that was good. Anyway, this is short stories, which he says in his afterword he does not write very much of. That it was 9 years between the last short story collection and this one, and there are 9 stories. So that's kind of how much he writes short stories. Yeah, and these are definitely short stories that some of them I would like to see spun up into novels. So I can see how this is kind of, when he writes a short story, it's ideas he doesn't want to lose that aren't really a novel yet. And 2 of them are in kind of a magic library sort of vein where characters show up on the doorstep from things, fictional things that have been written. And the first one of these stories develops the idea a lot more. Where they're in a magic library where all the characters live there. And it's bigger on the inside, and yeah. Very cool. I would love to see that be a series. Not just a novel, a series of novels. Because I love the setting, and there's so many ways that can go. Especially since they can go into the world of their novels. Kind of a Jasper Fforde-esque sort of approach, but it's definitely not. Not the same feel at all. But the same sort of playing with, spaces and characters, and it's not just the world that we see. Yeah, so that was fun. There's an essay kind of tacked on at the end after the stories, but before the afterward. That's about a zombie horror movie that I don't watch movies. I don't watch horror movies, and I skimmed it until it got to bits where it was more general and not about, so and so did this and then so and so did this, and because I'm not going to get anything out of that because I haven't watched and will probably not watch the movie. And there was some, commentary on nostalgia, which was kind of the overarching idea in the essay. But that one's one where it's going to be fans that are going to get the most out of it, and people that have watched the movie or plan to. So, for me, it was one of those, like the bonus bits that they tack on at the end of the book that most people are not going to want to read, but some people will be excited. That kind of thing. But I didn't rate the book with that essay in mind, because to me it was just like an appendix or something it's tacked on. So the 9 stories that make up the collection of stories were good. Only 2 of them didn't quite hit for me, but they were still good. They just weren't my thing. And yeah, so for me it was a 5-star book, probably 4.75 stars, but 5 stars. That's fine. So yeah, this next week I have a short stack of nonfiction that I'm going to try to get to. I will try to get to as many of the nonfiction as I can from my previous video. But in the meantime, I'm just going to try and keep reading, and I am focusing on Netgalley a lot. So I zeroed in on 4 nonfictions that I'm going to try and start this week. Lotharingia. This is a personal history of Europe's lost country by Simon Winder. And my sister wants me to read it, so I will be reading it hopefully this week. Nice, just history. Hopefully nothing too emotionally laden. Then I have Dragonfly, An Epic Adventure of Survival in Outer Space by Brian Burrow, which I've had for forever, from a different sibling, and need to finish. I have The World Until Yesterday, What We Can Learn from Traditional Societies by Jared Diamond. And an ARC that I've had for forever and just need to actually finish. Actually, I don't know if it's even an ARC or Galley copy. It's just one that I got as a Goodreads giveaway. So it might even be the finished copy. I think it probably is. It does not say Galley or ARC anywhere on it. Broken America. Seeing, Understanding, and Ending U.S. Poverty. So that one's more of the serious book out of my stack. That might be a little bit more emotionally impactful because it's more activist leaning. But yeah, none of these four should be terribly traumatic to read. And in Netgalley books, I have, let's see, I have the excerpt from Brandon Sanderson's new book that I'm looking forward to. That's like 300 plus pages. So it does tell me that whenever I actually get my hands on the finished copy, it's going to take a while. That's Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. So I'm going to start that probably today. We're snooding at the moment, sort of. But the high tomorrow is in the 40s. So we're only snowed in until it warms up tomorrow late morning, and then it'll all be gone. But for now, it's a snow day, and I can read as long as I want. So I'm going to probably start with the Sanderson novel, because that'll be fun. And even though it's just like the first 300 pages or so of it, most novels will be done in 300 pages. Then I have The Woman Behind the Door by Roddy Doyle. That'll be the third Roddy Doyle book I've read. I like his work. It does tend to be a bit more traumatic, so I might start with Sanderson and then go to that. I have Midnight in Blue by Ian Rankin, which I've read 2/3 of an Ian Rankin novel and stalled out because it was for a readathon and the prompts changed. So that'll probably be my first Ian Rankin that I actually finish, and then I'll go back and read the rest of the series. I have a Clive Cussler novel that I'm looking forward to, which I can't find on my list right now. Anyway, Clive Cussler, Graham Brown and Clive Cussler. In Netgalley, it actually lists Graham Brown as the author, so I'm curious about how that's going. But Graham Brown and Clive Cussler have been kind of co-authors in quite a few books leading up, so that's probably how the series will continue at the demise of Clive Cussler, because he's getting old. And then I have the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy Short Stories of 2024, edited by John Joseph Adams and Hugh Howey, that I started a couple months ago at this point. I think it started at the end of September, and I have not finished it yet, and I was really enjoying it. I just got distracted, and it wasn't crime fiction, so I didn't read it last month. So I'm going to get back to that. And I think that'll be all the Netgalley I'm likely to finish this weekend. If I even finish those this weekend. But yeah, you'll notice it's all fun books. It's all mainstream authors. I know what to expect. Not a lot of gruesomeness, not a lot of things that are going to make me mad or upset. So it's kind of therapy reading. And then I'll get back into some more hard-hitting books, but I will concede that I probably do need to do some fun reading, and then kind of parcel out the less fun, serious reading in among the fun reading instead of doing them all in 1 week. So, yeah, so that's kind of my plan. I am doing Read What You Own. I am aiming for 200 books, and I've not checked out any new library books. I will be finishing the library books that I have. I did check out 3 at the beginning of the month. Read What You started on the 4th this year. So I checked out 3 nonfiction, and I have 1 nonfiction that was still out. Returned everything else. So I'm not even getting print library books. I might still use a few audiobooks from the library just so I have audiobooks, because I don't own audiobooks and I still want them sometimes. But those are not going to count towards the challenge, even though they will count towards my book totals in general, and I'll still talk about them. But yeah, I'm going to really try and read down my collection. As I mentioned in the previous video, I have already been to the Bag of Books sale for our library for fall, and the next one isn't until April or May. Might even be May. So I have between now and then where I don't really even have a tempting library sale to buy books at. And I'm just not going to buy big batches of books between now and then. If I win books from Goodreads giveaways, I can add them to my collection. I'm not going to sequester them and not read them until I've finished my 200 books. But I don't win that many. I don't enter as many as I used to, and I haven't been winning any lately. So partly I don't enter them very often. So if I do win any books, those will instantly incorporate. If there are any read-alongs or buddy reads that come up, I'm free to add those to my reading, and they will count. They're going to be such a minority in that 200 books that they're not a big deal. But I'm not going out of my way to add books that I don't already own. And if I'm joining buddy reads, I'm going to try to be joining buddy reads that happen to be books I already have, so I can have more support for finishing the books I have. And 200 books is a lot, but I'm well over 415 books now for this year. So 200 books is not so insane. And I have about 5 months to do it in. So yeah, I think that'll work. So hopefully you guys are reading some great books and enjoying what you're reading and not overburdening yourselves with heavy-hitting books that make you upset and sad and angry. Don't do what I did unless you really want to. But yeah, if you're reading any books that you think I should check out, let me know. If you've read any of the books that I've read, let me know. And I'll check with you again, certainly in 7 days or so, and maybe before then if something else comes up. The cats say hi. They're so much in the dark right now. The cats say hi. I've got 3 of them, all curled up around me. There are a couple more, and we even have an extra cat in the sunroom because it's disgusting outside. So we have Fats Domino, big, round, chubby-cheeked, fixed brown tabby that's in the sunroom. So all the cats say hi, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys!